Welcome to the Successful Nonprofits Podcast. I'm your host, Dolph Goldenberg, and friend. Are you ready to start conversations with ease and confidence, even those hard ones, even the ones you've been putting off? If you're ready for that, you just need to get ready for an amazing episode because J. Tucker Miller is joining us to talk about her amazing new book, The First Four Words. Tucker's professional experiences are vast and arrayed. She has been a lawyer, a human resource professional, a risk management professional, a salesperson, a trainer, and also a consultant. But do you know what thread runs through all of those? She approaches her work with others using empathy, forthrightness, integrity, and encouragement. And when I read her book, The First Four Words, I saw that really shine through. So if you have ever put off that important or difficult conversation, trust me, my friend, you're not alone. In fact, we've all done it. And in the introduction to her book, there were two sentences that I realized I had to read in the introduction of this episode. And so this is a direct quote from her book. Somewhere between thinking you should have a conversation and imagining how it might go, you decide to neglect it altogether and hope things will just resolve themselves. But here's the problem. They rarely do. So friend, in our conversation today, Tucker is going to help us prepare for our next, and by the way, I'm saying us, me too, help us prepare for our next difficult conversation, help us cut through that procrastination, and also ensure that the conversation we do have is effective as it can be. Tucker, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. That was a great introduction. I really appreciate it.
Well,
I learned a few things about myself just from what you said.
well, they're true. Like, honestly, from having read your book, I know all those things are true. Now, oftentimes with authors, a good place to start because every book has an origin story. Tell me why you wrote this book.
Well, this is based on years of experience working, on myself, with myself, but most importantly, with executive leaders. And as an executive coach, working with leaders, and as a trainer, facilitator, presenter, working with executive leaders, these are the most powerful people in their organizations, the most educated, the most influential. And so I would work with them and we'd talk about some challenge that they were having. And invariably, that challenge would point to the need to have a conversation that they hadn't been having. So let's explore the conversation, I would say. What might you talk about? Why would it be important? We could have this whole conversation setting up the why, the how, and everything. And I'd say, great. Any reservations at all about having this conversation? No. So then when I check in with them to find out how the conversation went, it often didn't go at all. And I'd say, what happened? And I heard one thing very consistently. I didn't know what to say. And you think, you have a PhD, you have an MBA from Harvard, you have all these things, and you're telling me you didn't know what to say. I mean, the ego teases out funny expressions. What they were saying is, I was too afraid of messing it up, or the stakes were too high, or I might say the wrong thing. There were all these reasons why they were just avoiding it altogether. And I thought, how can I help my clients get over that fear of saying the wrong thing or setting off the wrong reaction? So I started to think about it, and I basically thought, if you could reduce a conversation meaningfully to the fewest number of words, what would be the sweet spot? So I started paying attention, keeping notes, and I found through a variety of sources of inspiration and observation, 4 words was the sweet spot. You could have too few words where that didn't necessarily go off very well. And we can have 8 to 12 words. And I'm a little self-conscious right now because I know I'm saying more than 4 words. But it was really in the brevity of the conversation that allowed them to be heard a little bit more. And also, when you think about, you mean I could start a meaningful conversation in as few as 4 words? Hmm, that's interesting. So I would ask them, if you could, what would be the 4 words? They could come up with 4 words to try. And even when they came up with the four and just wanted to prove me wrong, they were still motivated to try it. But what they consistently found is having a simple strategy of, if I could start the conversation that I'm afraid to have and do it as simply as 4 words, what might happen? There's where we move from fear and resistance to possibility. And that started to really change results. And I heard less often, significantly less often, the phrase, I didn't know what to say. That's
Yeah.
what I was trying to solve for.
There's something else in your book that you solved for. I certainly see what you just described with some of my coaching clients, but what honestly I see even more often, and I feel like your book solves for this as well, is in a coaching session with a client, we'll be discussing something. They'll agree, okay, I'm going to go talk to this person before our next session. We get back to the session. Oh, yeah, I had a great conversation. Everything went well. And then 2 weeks later, we're having another conversation about that person again. And with some people, 3 or 4 months later, I'll actually say to my client, we spend an awful lot of time in our sessions talking about the same person because while they might feel like they had a really great conversation, they've not been succinct and clear. So what I really loved about it, I almost envisioned in multiple ways being able to go, oh yeah, I could actually structure a clarifying conversation with somebody with a series of 4 word headers with a pregnant pause after each one. That was mind blowing.
I love hearing that because that's absolutely true. And you're taking it to a whole other level. So you're deep into the conversation now. What's the quality of the conversation and results that I can achieve with this strategy? And that was one of the things when I was contemplating, how do you really focus in on being a better leader? I was surprised that it was really 4 conversations that leaders needed to master, and to be succinct and brief and leave that pause or that space for the response. So, 4 words, 4 leadership conversations. How do we talk about performance? What does it look like? How do we perform well? And how do we make it succinct enough to be heard? Then what does conduct look like? Acceptable conduct, unacceptable conduct. This is the area, my background is as a lawyer, and I work in a lot of situations where people just think, if you do it the right way, just do the right thing. We're all adults here, but there's some nuances that could have very significantly different results. So how do we expressly talk about conduct? Then how do we support and how do we get feedback?
Before we talk about support and feedback, I also want to say, in terms of conduct, there are unspoken rules. And some of us arrive at the professional workplace not knowing those unspoken rules. I often talk about this, like I'm the child of a refugee. And so I arrived in my first post-college workplace and other people kind of just already knew what to do and how they were supposed to interact. I didn't. So it's interesting because I also think that conduct thing is can be cultural. And if we're not clear about what we as a workplace are going to do, it's really hard to hold people accountable for it.
That is so true. It is cultural, and we have multiple cultures showing up at work, multiple generations at work. And, you said, I didn't know the rules when I showed up, and nobody's going to tell you those rules, but you will hear about them when you cross one line after another. It's one mistake at a time. And that feels so much like failure for people when they're going through it. And it can create a stigma and ostracization towards the person who just doesn't get it. They keep crossing these lines. It's so unnecessary if we could just be a lot more specific about, this is what success looks like. This is the performance that we want. But also, here are some deal breaker behaviors that are just not going to fly around here.
Yeah. And then I know you also mentioned support and feedback are the other two key areas in the book that you outlined that are kind of leadership topics and conversation that we have again and again.
Yeah, so when I think about support, a lot of times we think we're talking about performance because someone's not meeting the expectation, they're not being successful. But have we asked the question, do you have the things that you need to perform well in your job? Or how can I, as a leader, support you? Are we getting to the root problem, or just pushing the poking the bear on the performance issue or even the conduct without even saying, what else do you need that I could help with? That's key. And then, what feedback are you providing? Are you celebrating people's successes with some specificity so that they know what behaviors you want repeated and that you like? And are you also receptive to the feedback from your team, from your peers, so that you're all increasingly more aligned as you work together on results?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a couple more things I want to hit on that are in your book. I loved some of the exercises you have in your book. And so, friends who are listening, what happens is Tucker will kind of lay out a scenario briefly in a paragraph and then say, okay, I want you to distill this down to 4 words. And I kind of felt like, I think it was Mark Twain who said, I could make this shorter, but I don't have time. And it helped me realize, oh, yeah, in order for me to crystallize that into the essence, the 4 word header, I need to set aside the time before that conversation. I shouldn't plan on doing it as I'm walking down the hall or as I'm logging into Zoom for the meeting.
hmm Absolutely. And that's part of the reason why I put not only the exercises, but a lot of space for you to take notes. This is really intended to be a conversation that you're having with yourself as you're going through it, refining these skills. It's a very simple strategy, but it's in the planfulness that you really will see the success. So I wanted to give lots of space and prompts to do that. And some of the exercises I'm sure you saw are ones that you could do with a partner. And I always say, if you're learning something new, why not practice with people who love you before you start taking it into a high stakes environment? And that was one of the things this book came about in part during COVID when my family and I have 2 adult children. We were all sort of gathered in our huddle, waiting for what's next. And so we started trying out some of these exercises and playing with things that worked really well, but we also explored a whole category of things probably never going to go well. Here's some, it's not just 4 words, because I hear people say all the time, what are the 4 words? Just give me the 4 words. There is no one set of 4 words that works for everything. But it's in the practice, the playing with it, the trying different things on, even changing up your tone of voice. That was one of the exercises in the book that, what's the tone or presence that I want to bring to this conversation that might make it more impactful. Ultimately, I think everyone wants to be heard better. So the goal is, how can you make it succinct in a way that people are hearing what you have to say?
Yeah. So as you were talking about that, I also thought, what a great, like for a leadership team, what a great team building activity to say, hey, we're just going to role play some of these so we can start to level set and say, okay, this is how we're going to interact with each other. And I've found it's much easier to have the conversation when it's a fictional one, but then everyone knows how it's going to go when it's not fiction.
Right. That's absolutely right. And I love hearing you talk about how can we try it together as a team, as a group. And I'm working with a group right now as a team building, seminar workshop for the day. That's exactly what they want to do, is start working with some 4 word phrases that they can take immediately back to their workplace. And the strategy is so simple, it's easily communicated. Now let's practice it together.
Yeah. I have a degree in social work and I spent countless hours in school doing role plays. And honestly, at some point it got tiresome, but I use it all the time now. I really do. Like when someone says to me, oh, this is going to be a hard conversation, I'm like, okay, let's role play it. Which side do you want to do first?
Yeah, that's great.
Which of the two? And then we'll kind of do it together. Now, I also know you just said, and I want to reflect this back to you, that some people will say, okay, just tell me what the 4 words are. I knew when the book arrived in the mail, I knew that I was not going to turn to page whatever 35 and it would say, I know you've been waiting for these magic 4 words. But friends, I have to tell you, this book gives you these magic 4 words in hundreds of different permutations. And there's a handful that I pulled out that I was hoping we could talk about.
I love it. And that is a goal, is that you find a few that fit so personal to you that those go into your toolbox. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, there's one that really stood out to me, and I took notice of it, and I wanted us to talk about it. And it's let's agree to agree.
Yeah. Let's agree to agree. We can agree to a lot of things. We could even agree that we're not going to agree today. But let's keep moving forward. The other reason for that one is, let's agree to stop admiring the problem here, and let's agree on a path forward. But I think, that statement's going to come up in the face of some disagreement. So, what's the thing that we have in common? We're all here at the table looking for some agreement. So, let's start with the pieces that we can agree to.
Yeah. And I'll also say, I think when we're working together, if we're talking about performance, conduct, support, or feedback, we can't agree to disagree. Like that's not
No.
going to work in a working relationship. It just isn't. We have to agree to agree. And I love the way you say that. We could even agree to not agree today, but we need to be working toward that alignment.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So another one that stood out to me, and this is one where when I changed the tone, you just talked about this. When I changed the tone, I'm like, oh, this can sound really different. So I'm going to try to say it as monotone and bland as I can. What did you hear? But then, what did you hear? What did you hear?
Hmm.
What did you hear? Like all of those different tones communicate something different in the same four words.
Yeah. So, one of the things, you can use it in a lot of different ways, some ways more effectively than others, depending on the circumstances. But, it's a reminder to check for understanding, not to use it as an accusation, but, I've just stated something. I need your feedback to see if I'm really conveying what it is I hope to be conveying so that we can get to this place of agreeing at some point.
Yeah, yeah. There's another one. You have an entire chapter on, hey, family gatherings, family settings, etc. But I'm going to share a story where I heard this in a professional setting and it was very useful for me. So come when you're better. And in the family setting, we've all experienced that, right? And you're the one who wrote it. So you could probably talk about the way in which you might experience that in a family setting.
Yeah, there are all these family gatherings that are dictated by the date or the holiday. And that may not be the day that you're able to show up at your best or even be available to others in whatever shape or form they show up. And so, if this isn't the right time for you, do we create enough grace and space to come when you're better? You know, family gatherings should be in celebration of each other, but not to put someone in a place where they're going to feel extremely vulnerable at what may be a fragile time.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll share with you how I heard this in the workplace. I heard it very early in my career and it was very useful. And I'm biting my lip because I'm trying to remember. I think it was about 1992, maybe 1993. So 30 something years ago. And I was in my early 20s. I woke up. I did not feel 100%, but I wasn't horribly sick. I just did not feel 100%. And I called my supervisor and I said, Esther, I'm not feeling well. I'm going to be in late today. I'm probably going to be in at about 11 or 12. And Esther said to me, Dolph, when you're here, I always have the expectation you're going to be fully here. So come when you're better. Don't come today.
Yeah.
And that did a couple things. First of all, there was a performance management there, right? Because she was essentially saying to me, yeah, don't come when you can't function at the level we want you to function at. Second was a conduct, which is okay, you know, don't call in for 3 hours. No. Either you're sick or you're not. It's not, you can't be like, oh, I think I'll be better in the middle of the day. But both of those honestly were things that I needed to hear at 21 or 22.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's such an important piece these days, too, as you think about all the additional challenges that people have been coping with, are coping with, and as we become more aware of the importance of mental health and empathy, is I need you here. I want you here. We expect you to be here, but we also need to balance it with some empathy and understanding for where people are. Because just forcing your hand to get people in there when they are already compromised in some fashion can be the thing that further sets everybody back. So I love that example. That's a great one.
And part of what I liked about it is I did show up the next day and I felt way, way better. Probably because I did not try to drag myself in at noon. you know?
That's probably right. She was
Yeah.
a smart woman.
Yeah. But again, I love the way she managed those expectations. And then the last one, speaking of managing expectations, never miss a deadline. Four simple words, never miss a deadline.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. That comes straight from my legal experience that, a deadline could be malpractice if you miss it, statute limitations and whatnot. But it's a principle that has served me very well in my career. And the people that make a lot of excuses for it may get by, but what they don't realize necessarily is that the price they pay is they're not perceived as respectful, reliable contributors. And it may not seem like that big of a deal until there is that big deal. And if we let those things coast over and over and over, deadlines may have been important, but as a leader, if you let them go without addressing them, you're accepting that as a standard for performance that may come back to cause a certain amount of regret. So it's like accountability. Are we accountable or are we not accountable? Where do we stand on this? Let me be really clear.
Yeah. So do you have a few favorite four-word sentences?
So many, and there's so many. I think the ones that kind of stick out to me at times are just the ones that you play with it any number of ways with tone of voice and you wonder, will I ever be able to make this one work? So I do have a chapter about, here's a few, let me save you the trouble. They're probably not ever going to work very successfully. So over my dead body is one of the ones that comes right to the top of the list. I mean, it's an intention getter. It's provocative. It could be funny. And there are a lot of things that comedians get away with and are encouraged to say. They get to do all the things that we don't get to do in real life, but they're not the things that translate very well to the workplace. And so the category of things that I hear sometimes, and I think in my head, is there any way that I could have made that work? Those are sort of interesting because frequently I can't. Over my dead body is one, is not my job. That one doesn't work very well. There's a category of those that when we start divvying up what's mine and what's yours and what's in my job description, and we start qualifying that, I can't do this is also one that it's not a favorite, but it's one I listen for. There's a commonly accepted forward phrase that you wonder, and this is the coach in me, are you undermining what you could do by defaulting to, I can't do this or I won't do this?
Yeah.
So,
I will also share with you, I have mad respect for people that are just upfront with me when they can't do something.
well, certainly, if it's, well beyond what they can do, but if it's you're the I can't do this person. I already know what you're going to say. That becomes very tiresome. But you're right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the example where there are a lot of forward phrases that we could all pull out, and I've listed many, and I keep learning more from these conversations with people. But every one of them is going to be situational and to the person and circumstance as well.
Right. Right. As you said, and this is true whether it's spoken or written in an email, because email, if you do it well, can connote tone. It's what tone are you using? If in the email I can sense your arms are crossed after you type, I can't do this. Okay. If it's if there's an exclamation point after it, I probably take it differently than,
Absolutely.
than if you say, I can't do this, but I can give you a report for that meeting.
That's right. One of the ones that comes up often is we need to talk. Well, if that comes from my good friend that I work with really well, that we like each other and finish each other's we need to talk. Great. I can't wait to pick that up and hear what's new. But if it's somebody that I always am in arguments with, we need to talk. It's in an email. It's the same phrasing. Nobody used capitals or periods where they shouldn't or exclamation points, but I'm definitely going to hear it in my mind differently and already be responding uh, with the tone that I've attributed to that email.
Yeah. So I also want to make sure we do mention this. You also say in the book, you've got some grace. 5 words is not the end of the world. If you can only get it down to 5, okay, not terrible.
Exactly. It's really the magic is in the planning and in the commitment to have the conversation. don't get so stressed out that you're not even, if I can't get it down to 4, then I'm walking away. I'm not going to have the conversation. That's very counter to the whole goal here. The goal is to get you to start thinking beyond the fear, beyond the resistance, and then what might you try, and how can you be enough curious about what would happen that you want to go check out whether or not you're right. That's the strategy right there.
And I'll say, like, that be enough for you to take that first step. Because,
Yes.
once you're in motion, it's inertia. That conversation is going to keep rolling.
Yeah. I love the phrase inertia because I always think, what's the difference between sitting on the couch and engaging in the conversation? And I refer to this 4-word strategy as the minimum viable product, or the MVP, that gets you off the couch and into possibility.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Well, Tucker, there's a couple more things I wanted to talk about that we're not going to have time for. Things like we model the behavior. We are the mirror is the leader. So if we don't model this behavior, we should not expect other people are going to adopt this behavior, and some other things. But we're rapidly running out of time. And I always feel like I've not gotten everything I want if I don't get to play two truths and a lie. So it is time for my favorite game. If you'd like to share 3 facts about yourself, 3 so-called facts, 2 of them will be true, 1 will be a lie, and I will try to figure out which one is not true.
Okay. I grew up in a military family and moved 13 times in my childhood. My highest deadlift weight when I was a power lifter was 295 pounds. And I make a great key lime cheesecake.
Okay, so I know the first one is true because in your book you talk about being in Japan as a kid. So I think you talk about that in your book.
Actually, the part of that that's not true is I wasn't in Japan, but I did grow up in a military family.
Oh, okay. Sorry, for some reason
That's
I
okay,
thought
but you're still
you're in
right.
Japan in your book. Okay, yeah. Sorry, I read a lot of books, so I'm confusing with someone else. But thankfully, I got the yeah, you were a military brat. I have to decide between power lifter or amazing key lime pie baker. And I'm assuming key lime pies are baked. I'm going to guess you were a power lifter, but you do not make an amazing key lime pie.
You are exact. Actually, I make a great key lime pie, but I said key lime cheesecake, which I would
Oh,
love to know how to make, but I don't know how. But I was a power lifter and lifted 295 pounds at my highest PR.
that is awesome. Now, do you also do CrossFit?
No, not anymore. My back told me I needed to do more Pilates and less powerlifting, so I shifted. But I do have a story about powerlifting in the book. I was afraid you might catch it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I was like, I really think you did. I really think so. But I'll share with you. You just used 4 words: more Pilates, less powerlifting.
That's what I mean. That is so funny. I get emails all the time. Did you see what I did there in 4 words? It starts to be kind of a fun second language for us all.
That's awesome. Well, Tucker, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for sharing your expertise and your knowledge and helping really myself and my friends who listen feel more confident in having some of those difficult, hard conversations. And friends, if you want to reach out to Tucker Miller, here's what you can do. You can go to onwardleadership.com. That is her coaching website. She does offer coaching. You also can go to jtuckermiller.com, and at that website, you can learn more about her book, which is out, which you can also order on Amazon, and about her speaking engagements. Tucker, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you, Dolph. It's really been a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, friends, once again, that's onwardleadership.com and jtuckermiller.com. Onward Leadership, if you want to learn more about her coaching, and J. Tucker Miller, if you are interested in booking her for a speaking engagement or want to know more about her book. We're going to link to both of those in our show notes at successfulnonprofits.com. Additionally, if you found this episode useful for you, if you think it's going to help you have some difficult conversations, there's one other episode I want you to consider. That's episode 311, The Power of Words with Erica Barnhart. And I'll share with you, that one's a little bit more about marketing, but clear, crisp, concise. also good for marketing. So if you could think about the power of your marketing words in just 4 words, trust me, it's going to be useful. And episode 311 will be useful for you as well. And you know what? I'm going to throw one more in there just because I am. So episode 208, The Magic of Thank You with Sandy Reese. Once again, thank you's only 2 words. When you read J. Tucker Miller's book, you're going to know, not a huge fan of 2 words, but I think thank you is the 2-word combo you can use over and over again, and you can't wear it out. All right, friends, that is our show for this week. I hope that you have gained some insight to help you and your nonprofit thrive. And the lawyers make me do it. Otherwise, I wouldn't. I'm not an accountant, nor am I an attorney. And in fact, I don't think we talked about anything related to legal, tax, or accounting. But hey, I'm here to tell you that you should not rely on either me, the consulting practice, or the podcast for legal, tax, or accounting advice. If that's what you need, don't turn to a podcast. Don't turn to Google. Don't turn to ChatGPT. Find a licensed, qualified professional in your area and get the support you need.